Right, how's it going? I'm Grant, you. This is Doodle Review, and today we're coming through with a special episode dedicated to Judas Priest. We're going to cherry pick a couple albums from their catalogue and end up looking at their latest, Invincible Shield. I can't claim to have ever been like a die-hard Priest fan. The albums we'll cover today are the only ones I know kind of back to front, but they were a big part of my initial entry into harder forms of rock. When I was like 10 years old, my brother burnt a mix CD for me, mainly of tracks he'd discovered from like skating and BMX videos, and it was my first introduction to metal bands like Priest. The tracks Breaking the Law and Hellbent for Leather were included, but also Metallica and Iron Maiden. It also included punk in the form of British oi band Hardskin, and hip hop as well, like Nas, Exhibit and Jurassic 5. To be honest, it was an absolutely wild combination of songs, but I practically burnt that CD into my brain the amount I played it. Flash forward some 20 years later, and we just went to catch the band Priest live at Wembley Arena on their Invincible Shield tour, and it was quality. Saxon opened, who I don't know well, but definitely got people in the mood for an evening of new wave of British heavy metal. Rob Halford and co were on straight after and ran through a set that touched on about 10 different albums from their band's catalogue, naturally leaning towards their latest, Invincible Shield, and their classic British Steel. The band sounded tight, and Halford kind of defies the natural order of things. It's still absolutely killing it vocally at 72 years old, and with no slouching on the costume changes either. As we would come to the end of the night, I wondered if we would miss out on the legendary entrance to the stage on a completely unnecessary but utterly amazing Harley Davidson, but as the encore hit, I was not disappointed. It's annoying we had to leave to catch the train early because we missed out on the last couple of tracks where the band were joined by the original guitarist Glenn Tipton. Although we missed out on those last couple of bangers, it was a great night. Leading up to the gig, I looked up on what their set was going to be online, and because it just made sense to equate myself with whatever they were going to play, and British Steel was the one that they seemed to lean on the most. So let's talk about it. And so, of course, Breaking the Law was among the first material I heard from the band, and it's a certified banger. So it's had many replays from me over the years. Living After Midnight is also familiar because it's such a widely known hit. This track almost feels like it's bigger than the band in that it's so palatable and non-metal fan friendly. I've heard it played at weddings, like down the shops and on the radio sporadically over the years. So much to the extent that I can imagine like a huge part of the mainstream audience have no idea that it comes from the same band that would make like Painkiller. Likewise, some metal fans who are less au fait with the Brum legends probably wouldn't know that they did this top 40 radio hit. The rest of the album was largely unknown to me, but I had some idea of what to expect because I'm a massive Motorhead fan, and while Lemmy's band always had a little less theatrics and a bit more of a rawer rock and roll sound that put them closer to punk than most old school metalheads would like to admit, their sound kind of evolved in the same way as Priest and some other new wave British heavy metal bands. That is, that they kind of started their journey heavily influenced by British blues and rock and roll bands of before, but wanted to take things in a faster, darker and a little harder direction. This in and of itself was revelatory and helped put the metal genre on the path that led to where we are today, but things definitely kind of took a turn when thrash came about in the 80s, the faster, chuggier, darker and even riffier mutation of the sound Priest and others pioneered, led by Slayer, Exodus, Metallica and Anthrax. This style ended up kind of pushing the whole genre to adopt a harder edge. Even the glam metal of the 80s had a markedly more aggressive tone compared to the stuff from the decade prior, even with the polished choruses. Priest, to their credit, started adopting this crunchier, heavier sound really early. I'd say as early as 82's like Screaming for Vengeance, which to be honest is early enough to question whether it was an influence of the nascent thrash scene or a sound that they'd kind of arrived at independently. Anyway, this is a really round the houses way of saying that, like a lot of legacy metal bands, there's basically a 70s heavy blues rock era and then a post 80s thrashier, darker sound that modern metal heads would say feels more familiar. British Steel arrives slap bang in 1980 and so captures the band at the peak of this heavy blues rock era with little flashes of the thrash sound that would come in the decade ahead, and it sounds fucking awesome. It kicks off with the track Rapid Fire featuring a fast-paced double kick drum drum and a really cool central riff that kind of epitomizes the swagger over technicality approach to metal guitar of the day. It actually does switch things up to a more technical and kind of naughty little faster riff during the midsection, like I say, dropping hints about what's to come in the decade ahead. Metal Gods kind of slows things down with a mid-tempo, consistent pumping bass line and a restrained but melodic chorus before we hear that epic solo snare crack that ushers in the iconic Breaking the Law riff. Not much you can really say about that track. It will forever be a banger to me, KFC advert or not. Grinder is a track that just has me in awe of the guitar tone. It has that really warm and roomy aspect to the metal crunch that kind of seemed to die out at some point over the late 90s, but sounds so good. This is an example of a track from this era really using the traditional metal chug sound as a hook all by itself in the chorus. It's simple but really effective. And guitar tone is something I tend to focus on during the next track, United, because the rest of the tracks and the record's closer, Red, White and Blue, is just a bit too much of a flag shagger sentiment. It doesn't really resonate with someone of my age. You know, in my lifetime, my country's really done nothing to take pride in, fought no just wars, or barely ever been on the right side of history. So while I appreciate that at the end of the day, positive sentiments are in these tracks and how it fits into the blue-collar, industrial, British steel theme, these tracks just aren't for me. It's probably my only criticism of the album though, because otherwise it's an absolute ripper. Just listening to that long chuggy groove on Steeler, man, you can't get better than that. This is an 8.5, brought down only by the patriotic stuff. So in 2018, Judas Priest released their 18th record, Firepower, and I'll agree it's really quite random that this one would make its way into my collection before any other Priest record, but this was the first time they'd put out anything new during the period of my life, which is still ongoing, where I listen to as many new albums as I can. I really had no expectation when I gave this a listen. If anything, I was probably expecting the worst, because I don't know many artists where their 18th record has much replay value, especially within the metal genre, but damn if this record didn't blow my bollocks off. Metal is one of the few genres within the broader canon of rock where it's never a dead cert that I'm going to enjoy it. There's metal I love, but there's also a ton that I think is just lame. Heaviness doesn't have anything to do with it. You know, give me something that shares more in common with Evil White Noise, the melody, and as long as it's cool, I'll be down. But I just find more than any other genre it fails that cool test for me more often than not. But Firepower is so unique because it plays with so much of what I would typically deem pretty corny, but just does so with enough of a glint in the eye that I'll just fully embrace it. The riffs are rad, the hooks are next level. Even the dramatic metal power ballads like Never the Heroes, they just sound so good. Halford is on form on this record, shrieking his way through Evil Never Dies, growling his way through Necromancer, and pouring his heart out on the slower moments of Children of the Sun. He's a true powerhouse. The album is instrumentally, it's just so strong as well, and I think it's the combo of both of these things, Halford's power and hooks, plus Tipton and Faulkner's guitars, that bring me around when the songwriting maybe even isn't my cup of tea. Rising from Ruins, for instance, just played straight, just the general progression, the melody and lyrics probably wouldn't be for me, but everything from the slower clean guitars at the beginning, the fucking mandolins that are added halfway through, Halford's double tracked vocals. I don't care that you're singing like Resist the Devil, Dare to Dream, By Grace of God, Within Our Hearts Eternal, like fuck it man, I'm on board. This album is wall to wall bangers. If you're into a bit of the slightly theatric, slightly operatic metal, well, you probably know about it, but I'd say even if you tend to give that stuff a wide berth like I do, this honestly has some of the best riffs, best hooks in that genre. It might just win you over. At an hour long, I'd normally be tempted to say it's too long, and sure, there's probably a couple of arrangements that could have been pared back a bit, but in terms of songs, I really don't think there's anything I'd lose in the whole set. It's 14 tracks of power that will have you doing your best metal Halford impressions and punch in the air. This one is an 8.3. So that takes us to Invincible Shield, the band's latest album, released just a few weeks ago. Knowing how much I loved Firepower, I was very excited to get into this one. However, I will say that while this has some cool elements to it and some great energy at points, it isn't quite the tour de force of Firepower due to some overly long tracks without enough to engage you, as well as some kind of middle of the road riffs. Let's start with the good though. Panic Attack kicks things off with a riff that, while I think uses completely different notes, is sequenced in a way that is way more than a tip of the hat to Tom Sawyer by Rush. It's not a diss by any means. It's actually really cool and suits a metal track like this. They add these like cool little bends into it as well, which are decent. It jumps from this into a nice driving and catchy metal verse section, while the chorus has some quality double kick runs. Serpent and the King has that classic new wave of British heavy metal sound to it, and Halford's vocals on this one are insane. That shriek is absolutely piercing and totally matches the energy of the guitar. I actually enjoyed this one quite a bit, but the chorus vocal is an example of some of the less exciting melodies or hooks we get on this album compared to Firepower. Devil in Disguise and Gates of Hell are faultlessly played and certainly have the energy, but they're just built around quite bland riffs, not particularly memorable, and often, in the case of Gates of Hell especially, given way more runtime than they need. We get this in the later part of the album as well. Trial by Fire, I appreciate this one has quite a unique drum part and rhythm to what is offered on the rest of the album that kind of sets it apart and feels a bit different, but again, the actual song itself is just pretty uninspiring. The record comes with a few bonus tracks, which, as in most cases, are pretty unnecessary, aside from the track Fight of Your Life, which is such a fun glam metal bar band barn burner. It would have been worth swapping out this with one of the blander ones from the main album for me. I think it's undeniable Rob Halford must have had some influence on Axl Rose in the past, but I swear there are parts on this track where certain phrases where it sounds like Rose is actually duetting with Halford. The track itself actually has a little Guns N' Roses in it as well, with those little breaks away to these harmonized bluesy licks in the verse. It's a lot of fun. There are a couple of other belters on the main album I have to give some props to. As God Is My Witness is without a doubt one of the best thrashy songs on the album, with a sick opening riff and an absolutely pummeling double kick drum part from Scott Travis. The closing track of the official track list, with without those bonus cuts, is Giants in the Sky, and while the main riff gives me a little Metallica memory remains, in fact I can't help but wanting to do the Jason Newsted Rob Trujillo insane from the live version of that track during the chorus. Nonetheless, I think this is a great mid-tempo metal banger with lyrics I like to think pay some sort of tribute to the dearly departed Lemmy, as well as other metal giants lost over recent years. I'm going to give this one an enjoyable on the side of middling ranking, or about a 5.9, and knock it on the head. That's what I think. What about you? Let me know in the comments. Check out some of my other reviews in the description below, and while you're doing all that, obviously give us a cheeky subscribe. Subscribe, share some thoughts, show some love, or just have some abuse in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers mate, bye.